Hi, I'm Mark from Trail Buddy. Today we're continuing our video. Hopefully we can get some fire on this bike tonight. But I did not get to our foot peg, our buddy pegs in the back. And that does have some uniqueness to it. So we'll jump into that first and we'll get them installed. So when we're installing our buddy pegs here, you'll notice that they've got a flat chunk of metal welded on here. And then on the swing arm where the threaded hole is, there's also should be a flat here. Now, some of the newer bikes, they actually deleted this feature. It's all welded up. I think it's from somewhere around 1978, around there, where they didn't have that feature. But for us, we do. So we're going to put some buddy pegs on here. So what this is it's like an anti-rotation tab. There's going to be some slop, but if you try to put it on, you know, like this or somewhere like that, you'll be on top of that. And when you go to stand up on it, or your partner or your buddy, it can also swing down, because that's what these are here. They keep it from rotating around. So before we put this on, we noticed even when I was doing the power washing that something made a nice home in here, and like a mud dauber wasp or something. So there's all kinds of sand and stuff in there. So what we're going to do is I've got our thread chaser kit here. I'm going to find the right thread for this guy here. And the easiest way to do that without actually knowing, you can measure the diameter. But one of the more important things is you've got the pitch, or the threads. So you want to make sure that you're picking one, that one is the right diameter and two has the right thread pitch. So this, when you get the right one, what you're going to do is you're going to lay it right on there and make sure it meshes and matches. So it looks like I'm missing my 10 in here, but I'll find that. And but you want to make sure this is a 12 by 1.25. So some of the diameters, different diameters, can share the same thread pitch. But we're going to chase this out, get all this goob out of here, and then we'll bolt it up. So I went ahead and off camera here, I got my little tube cleaner here. So I went in there, I sprayed some cleaner in there, got it all cleaned out. I got most of the sand and the whatever the webbing material is in there. And my kit that I showed before, unfortunately, didn't have a thread pitch that was the right size. So this is an M10 by 1.25, and like the more popular is like an M10 by 1.5. So it had a 1.5 in there. So what I'm going to show is how to make yourself your own little thread chaser. So I went ahead and I found another bolt that matched the ones that come with the kit here. And so what essentially we're going to do is we're just going to cut a line or a groove in here, maybe on two different sides. And what that does is that just gives a place for the crud to go. And you can make your own thread chaser, so you don't have to buy one. If threads are kind of good, but they're all like maybe rusty in there, and it's, as long as you can start it, then you should be good to go. The really good way to do this is, and I think I showed it in previous videos when I was tapping out the rear brake cable area, is you can use an actual tap, and we have those on the site too. But that's a little bit more advanced. If you have any, because you got to kind of feel that you're not cutting the threads up or cross threading, but you want to, it's the best way to clean them out. I do that on all the bikes when we paint them. So I'll show you. So there's two ways that I use to do this. So you can get a file, and you can go ahead and put this in a vise, and you just go along until you got a really good groove in there. Or what we're going to use is we've got our cutoff wheel. So I just go here, get a good cut groove, and make my bolt. So we'll show how to make this, and then we'll move on. This is kind of the thing you're going to run into when you're restoring and doing all these bikes, is you're going to run into little stuff where you're going to need either go buy tools or make your own tool. But stuff like this is part of the fun. You know, if you like tinkering and getting this stuff and making it refreshed, that's just what's going to happen. So we'll make one up. Got our new tool cut and made, and we're going to clean her out. So throw a little lube in there. Ooh, that sounds crunchy. Yep, so we're starting. Run the bolt all the way in till it stops. One little hard spot. That's good enough. Run her back out. Oh, that's cutting. You can hear it grinding, and that little wasp put all kinds of dirt and sand in this thing. And they were pretty rusty too, so it's not just the wasp fault or bug, whatever bug it was. There we go. So that thing is full of all kinds of sand and rust. Wipe out that little groove that I cut with that cutoff wheel is all full of junk. And in here, it looks. Yeah, I've got safety glasses on my head. I might as well use them. I keep my hair safe. All right, get that. We'll blow it out with an air nozzle. All right, there we go. Good as new. I went ahead and did the other side off camera. Same thing. Got a whole bunch of stuff. We're gonna go ahead and bolt these on. So if you're using an impact or something like that, it's don't ever rely on that to make sure that it's tight. Because I'm getting a couple good turns here with my ratchet. So there we go. So they fold out, stand on them. When your buddy's gone, back up. So this is pretty much the same thing on the other side. It's got the anti-rotation tab. And I think now we're gonna move on to the carburetor. Onto the carburetor. So we've got everything laid out here in front that comes with the motor plus some extra stuff. So what will come in the motor is you're going to have the carburetor that's matched to the motor, intake, the bag with hardware in it. You'll have some gaskets and some heat isolators. And you'll have your filter here. So this comes non-oiled. So we got some stuff. We'll oil this when we finish it off. And then some of the extra things that we have down is we've got our fuel selector switch here. So we've got on and reserve, and then out to the carburetor. And that also comes with its the fasteners here to go into that spot of the frame where the air filter box, where the original would mount. So we're going to mount that up there. And then importantly, we are doing something that's a little bit unique is we're trying to use the original Honda controls. So to make this carburetor work and everything we've got in there, we've got our little 90-degree adjustment kit here. So what this does is it takes up a lot of slack that will be in that, we'll call it the free play of the throttle cable. So we'll have to probably trim that. We'll get into that in detail in a few minutes, but we're going to start with the intake. And we also have our fuel line here that we're going to have to cut. But what I like to do is I'll mount my selector switch. I'll get it up here and I'll put it right where I want it. I have it marked for reserve. Then I'll cut it, and then I've got my little extra here. This makes it nice for pulling it through the frame. You do a little loop. But I'll cut this, and then I'll use this going from my selector switch up to the carburetor. And we'll get this cut, and we'll get the intake on here first. So before we bolt everything up, I tend to like to put this together ahead of time. It's just easier to get at everything than when you're on the actual motorcycle. Because like the frame and everything's all right here, and it can be a nightmare. So we're going to do this. So it turned out intake here. How you tell the difference is the one that goes to the carburetor. These two holes are set high. They're not in the center line of the intake. So the part that goes to the motor or the head, they're right in line with the hole for the intake. So this one will get a gasket going to the head, and this one right here will go to the carburetor. So before we put our carburetor on, we're going to make sure it's all clean. No gunk in there. And we've got our heat isolator here. Now you want to check to make sure that you have a good O-ring. and that it's not, if you're working on an old bike, sometimes these get hard. The new ones here were good. We just got to make sure it's in there because the black one, it's hard to see if it's still there. So we've got it. We're good. So we got the O-ring goes towards the intake like that. And then we've got an O-ring on the carburetor, which will go like that. So I've got my hardware here. And I'll get this set up ahead of time. And we will put together our carburetor. There's one. And we got the other side. So you're going to have to end up doing the final tightening for this when it's on the bike. So don't forget. And we'll get our 10 millimeter and our 8 here on the other side, and we'll get this tightened down. And then as soon as we get this tightened down, we'll move to the head, and we'll get our gasket here in between the head. Very important. We got to take our sticker off here, the one that comes with shipping, to keep all the crap from getting in there. We want to take that off. It would be unfortunate if we left it on. There we go. You want to make sure you get all that off. Another thing you want to check out before you put it on is you want to make sure that there's no, I don't know, what do you want to call them, like little goobers or something where this got hit before they put the motor together. Because what you want is you want a really good flat mounting surface here before, that way, because what can happen is if it's up high like this, it could be sucking air in here and it'll be horrible, because the motor will run, but it'll be heck of a thing to tune because your air fuel mixture will be way off. So there's a big old, I don't say huge, but there's a little spot right here where it's bent up just a little bit. So what we're going to do for that, and we also want to make sure that we're checking our intake. This one is really, you want to run your hand and finger over it to make sure everything's flat. This one feels real good. This one here is just going to need just a little bit of love to get rid of this little piece here. But thing to check before you do it, and also to make sure that we have our right fastener. I always like to grab it and just double check. So you should be somewhere, you know, around a 1/2 inch or so by eye. And just so you don't have extra long ones. So double check that fastener length. So I'm going to clean this surface up here, and then we'll bolt it on. So I got my clean file here. I got a rag pushed in the inside, and I'm just going to lightly go over this to get rid of that big old mark. It only takes a couple good swipes, but there was a little booger here pressed up. So now we're good and flat, and we're ready to go on. All right, we'll get the carburetor in here. All right, so we're gonna get this on. So the intake on these are turned out. Typically, we usually run like a universal throttle assembly. And that one you don't need the elbow and stuff, but it's turned out so we have the bigger carburetor that matches with the cc's of the motor, and it can fit inside here above the jug. We're just outside the frame. We'll grab our fasteners that we've checked are the right length. We'll just start them here. So for this, you don't want to sock one down and then expect the gasket to be right on the other side. You want both sides good and loose, so that way you can find the hole on the corresponding side without too much of a grief. All right, so I got that. I got the other one started. It's finished. I'll do that one on the other side in a minute. So you want to kind of move it back and forth, find the middle, and then lightly tighten this side. And then you're going to want to go on the other side, get that tight, come back over here, double check, and then finish over there. So I'll finish this up, and we will move on to the fuel selector switch. We're getting ready to mount our fuel selector switch, so a couple things on that. So it comes with the M6 bolt here and then a nut. The nut is more for if you've got like a clone or an aftermarket frame or a frame that does not have that threaded insert in here. This is just a little long for our OEM one here. But just to note, like if you got this, you could always put a jam nut on the backside, and that'll also help to keep this from loosening up. That could be a good use for that one. But in the end, this is really the nut here is intended for a clone bike. But for our fuel selector switch, we've got two inlets. So the upper one here is for on or regular riding, and then the lower one is for reserve. And pointed here to this dot is off, so it's got an arrow here for fuel. If you move it up, it's pointing at a bucket that's open with a line towards the top, which is really, I guess this is universal for language, but it really not that great for. And then you got another bucket here that's open, and it's got a line way to the bottom, so that is reserve. So that's just the call out of this for so you know which one is on, off, or reserve. But we'll mount it up. Okay, now we're gonna get ready to hook up our fuel line. So when I put this in here, I marked an R and an arrow for the line coming from the reserve portion of the tank. And this one will just be regular fuel on. What we need to do now is make sure that we've got them to the right selection. So we've got, let me get this to it, curves nice. So we've got our R, and our R is going to go to the bottom. We're going to go here, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to cut it about here. Make sure we got a nice loop here. I can maybe go back just a little more. What we don't want is we don't want this to get tight so it kinks. But we don't want it to get too loose where it lays on the head here where it gets real hot. It's kind of a good balance. I'm going to cut my first piece here. And then what I'll do is I'll take the next one and then get that to where I've got a nice arc. And then I'll cut that, and I'll have a good leftover, and the leftover will go over here to the main carburetor fuel line or feed line. So I'll cut these here, and we'll get them mounted. So I'm cutting my last line here. So this is my on. And if you ever have trouble putting these on, you give them a little shot of cleaner or gasoline or something. But one thing I wanted to note is, like, if this is the right diameter, now it's really important to use motorcycle fuel line, because the automotive fuel line is all braided and it's really, really thick. It's not meant to really clamp on these barbs as much, because it's really designed to have a hose clamp put on the outside, and they're just really, really thick and they're hard to move. But this really good gray stuff is more the expensive stuff, but it's really pliable. And what we put on here most of the time is we've got good engagement on our barbs. We just go ahead in the center barb, we put the small zip ties here to keep them from ever working off, but they're really on here really, really good. These are not coming off. They won't leak as is, but we'll put a small zip tie we can get for, we also have the OEM ones. If you feel more comfortable using that, that will also fit on here. But we like using the zip ties because you just cut them off and put a new one on if you're ever going to change it, and then put a new one on. But now we've got our leftover line, and we just want to make sure that I cut it long enough, because we don't want the line to go too high. We want it to be on this carburetor here. Our pull choke is here. We want to be just above that, and then coming right down on it. Because if you get, we'll be on the other side of the bike here in a couple minutes, but if you get too high, what happens is you get a big air bubble trapped in here, and then the gas has got to try to go up and then down. Because if you think about where the level of your tank is here, you never want anything to go higher than this, just because it's gravity fed. There's no pumps or anything on here. If you ever have any trouble with anything with fuel starvation, the first thing to look at is get a flashlight, look down your fuel tank cap, and it's quite often, like we have our old original one in here, so we'll verify this before we go any further, but quite often there's crud up inside that tank that's down into the inlet, and that'll give you some fuel starvation. And also those plastic tanks, be very, very mindful and look at those before you put them in. We expect ours before we put it in, but people will use those hose clamps and they'll just pinch on that tank and over this, and it'll close off that little plastic. The steel tanks are really the best per se way to go. You want to keep it original. I mean, the plastic ones aren't horrible. You just got to be careful that you don't accidentally mess it up. So we'll get this one on this side, and we'll switch over to the other side and continue on, and I'll show us how to hook that up. There we go. Yeah, we're switched over to the other side of the bike, so we're going to get our little protective piece off here. And we're going to try to bring this around. We want enough slack. But what we don't want, like I was talking about before, is we don't want this, because this is too high for where our gas tank bottom is. Really, ideally, like if you were seeing this here, this is probably about level with the bottom of the gas tank. So we never want to go any higher than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we kind of follow down and about right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that there. And with this 3/16 line that we have, it's really a good snug fit. All right, so we're about level here. We're not kinked. And all right, we're ready to move on to the throttle cable mount. So before we do anything, it's always a good idea to note where our throttle slide is. So let's say we put our whole throttle cable assembly together, and this guy here is actually up high, you know, like that, versus down lower. So what that'll be is that'll be really exciting because it'll be pulling almost, you know, it could be so much throttle, revving up, really exciting. But also it could be like, oh man, what's going on? But as you're learning this stuff, this is one thing to see. Like, this is how it's going to start. And if your throttle adjustment screw is all the way down here, see how it's moving? Up and down. So we're going to start with that down. And we're going to go ahead and take this whole assembly out. And we'll start putting together here onto our cable. All right, now that we've got a baseline here for our slide, which is the idle position, we'll go ahead and take our cap off. We'll dive into the details here. So as you unscrew this, keep your fingers above, because there's a spring in here, and this could go shooting off into the shop somewhere if you're not ready. So I got a clean rag down below here. I'm going to put all my parts and pieces. So we're going to pull the slide out. Make sure you got good clean hands. Do not want this to go get any crud in here, because that's where you'll run into trouble with the sticky throttle. So we're going to reset the camera, and we're going to get this nice and close so we can see the details of what we're going to be working with. So we've got our slide out, and let's talk some of the details here. So there is an orientation for putting this guy in and out. Now, guys that have been doing this a long time, this is old hat, but for the newbies, here we go. So this angled piece here is where our throttle adjustment screw hits, and that's what adjusts it. So when I adjust that, I typically like to pull the throttle up a little bit, adjust it, and then have it come down. This is really more for a fine adjustment. And on the other side, here we've got our slot. So in the carburetor, there's a little needle sticking out, and that goes into this side, and that's what keeps it in the right orientation. So the details here, we've got our, this is our needle, and this is what actually controls the fuel being released from the bowl. This guy is what controls the air. So this is where we're making our Venturi effect for the air-fuel mixture ratio. So the next part that comes into it is we've got our throttle cable retainer. Now there's W clips, or these flat little guys here that come across. I'll go over that in a minute. But now we'll go over to the needle and how this guy works. So there's 5 locations on here for fine-tuning your fuel mixture. So you got up or down, and that corresponds with either, you know, if you put the needle or the clip down, the needle will be raised up higher and allow more fuel to come through. So now if you move the clip here up, it's going to be further down into the jet and not allow more fuel to go in. So now it'll be leaner. So that's how that guy works. And inside here, we've got our feed through for our cable. So we've got our cable here. This guy will go through, and then it's got a little slot, and that on the back side there's a feed through, and then the retainer, and that's where it's going to end up living. So without the spring on here, because it's a bear with that dang spring on here, so I'm going to bring it through here. So you kind of, it goes through, over, and in. So that's, you got to make sure you're not like this. Now you'd be getting weird throttle, or you want to make sure you got a good seat. It's kind of tough because that spring and that cap will all be here, and I'll put that here together in a minute. But that's the details of this. And then we've got our retainer piece here that goes on the top, and that keeps this from rattling and pulling out. And then our spring, I'm going to put this back together the right way, but our spring will be over, this will be going through the center of the spring, but this will hold everything down and keep your throttle returning. So that's the details of this guy. Each carburetor is a little bit different, but now we'll go ahead and install this thing for real. So this is where we're going to have to get into some customizing. Since we're using an aftermarket engine, aftermarket carburetor, everything is different from what the original would be. So what we've got to figure out now, we've got our nice little elbow adjuster. This is going to take up some gap, but every time you use this with any of these aftermarket carburetors, you need to figure out, we got to cut this guy down a little bit to be able to work with our, to take up some of our throttle. So what I did is I got this set up, I got the needle out, and we're going to measure how much we need to cut off of that elbow adjuster. So the way that I like to do it is we've got to take two measurements. Careful not to cross thread these. There we go. So we got to measure our slack that we need to take up to the top of this cap here. That's what we can measure first. And then we got to measure from here down into there, where this will seat in there, down in there like that. So we'll work on that. And we got to get this. So we're going to pull it up till the throttle. You can see here the slide hit. And we're going to take our caliper and we're going to measure this distance. So I'm going to just be working in inches just because I can visualize it better. So this is just over a half inch is our first dimension. So I got that written down here. And now the second one, take this apart, we're going to have to measure from the top of this to the inside of that counterbore. And those two added together will be what we need to cut off of the bottom of that elbow. So our first measurement we have is a half inch. Okay, so now we got our second dimension we need to get. We're going to measure the inside, so I'm going to put that probe in there. So we hit the inside of that counterbore, and we're going to hit that, and that's our dimension. So right here, we're over 5/16 of an inch, roughly. So we're going to take that dimension plus the other one, and that's what we need to remove from our throttle elbow here. So we got our measurement from the cap and then inside the cap. We'll add that together, and that's what the spacer needs to be. So just make sure I didn't misspeak earlier. We just want to make sure that that dimension is what we want left over. So it was about 800 thousandths roughly, right? We'd have about a half inch and then 300, so it's around 8. So the bottom of the cable sits about right where that groove is, right there. So we went roughly about, it's better to be a little lower because we have adjustment here. So here we've got about 800 thousandths left over. So this is one that's uncut, and this is the one we just cut to take up that gap difference. Now you really only have to do this stuff if you're trying to use the OEM throttle. Set up all of our aftermarket ones, we've got cables ready for it. And then this one, the only reason we haven't is these are so different in terms of working with that OEM, because the other ones have a larger adjustment in it, in the cable and or the throttle assembly. So this is where we just got to make it up. So again, we've got one out of the box that we haven't cut, and then here's the one we cut down to take up the gap or the difference. So we'll put it together, and what we're going to make sure is we're going to make sure we've got our adjustment all the way down and in. So we want, when we do that and we put it together, we want a little slop in the throttle, so that way we can adjust this back and take that slop out. So we'll put it in. getting ready to put our pieces together. Now I tested the two. Now this rubber here is the one that came with the carburetor. This one here is what came with the elbow kit. So the one with the elbow kit works the best in terms of keeping junk and sand out. Because it's got a really good detent right here where you feel it stick on. So we've got that. Then we're going to grab we'll put this way up for right now because we need to play with our adjuster. Then we'll put in our custom elbow, and we got ready, so we got to adjust it all the way in. Then we've got our cap. All right, followed by the spring. And we've got our needle. I took that out just because it was in the way for adjusting. I'm going to grab our little rotator. I'm going to put it to where I can get into that hole easy. I'm holding the spring here with one hand. This is kind of I've been doing this a long time, so I've got it grabbed. I got the cap. It's all in my hand. Now I'm going to grab that, put that in here, tip it over, push it over into the hole, pull the cable, and we got it. So there is a right and wrong way to put this back in here, right? We've got our adjustment. It's got to be on our side. We've got our slot on that side. We double check we got that okay. You can feel it when it gets in the right spot. Oop, got it. Now, this is really easy to cross thread these guys. They're really, really fine threads. So just be careful. If you feel like it's cross threading, just kind of stop, back off, and go again. There we go. I find it's nicer if you kind of hold it as square as you can and sometimes go backwards. You can hear the thread jump and then go the other way to tighten. All right. So we'll work on our cable management later. We just want to make sure that we've got this cut and made correctly. All right, so now we're going to look down inside the carburetor, and that looks to be like it was when we first installed it, but the real tell is, do we have slop? Yeah, so we've got a little bit of slop in our throttle because I'm turning the throttle a little bit without this slide moving. So that's what we want. So when we do our fine tune, what we can do is we can adjust this out until we get next to nothing for slop, and then we hit it with the jam nut, go tighten it where we want it, and we put this cover back down to keep all the sand out. And that's what we're looking for, but we're going to wait to do that till we get the motor running so we can do our final tune. But again, too, this is the important, because you don't want this to be up, holding the throttle open, because then when you go to start it, it's going to just rev up. But we took up our difference, we've got that, and now we're going to move on to our air filter and the details with that. So our air filters, again, come non-oiled. And what we like to use is you can use a uni spray, or we've got some K&N ones here on the shelf. What I like to do is I'll do a light spray on this inside one. And then, let it sit for a little bit, and then do another light spray and then let it sit maybe a couple times. Because what happens if you really just rinse it, it seems to like pool up. And then our outside one here, I usually leave this, I don't oil it at all. Why that works nice is you put this over top, and this is kind of like grabs all the big dust. Obviously the end's going to get it, but what you can do is you can take that off, beat the dust off, and put it back on and run it for a little while longer. So we're going to spray this. I'll spray it once, and then we'll do it a couple times later. But so when we do our spraying, we're just going to try to get a nice even coating. Now the K&N's kind of nice because it's red, so you can kind of see it go on. All right, get the end. All right, we got it good. Another thing we can do is we can also put it like back in the bag that we got it from. And then we can use the bag and really work the oil in. I used to do this a lot with the motocross bikes or trail bikes. There we go, I've got it good and oiled. You don't want to go nuts. You don't need this thing to be dripping, because if you put too much on here, it'll pool to the bottom and get all over your motor. So I'll probably do that one another time to get it a little bit heavier. Now we can move on. Put our cover back on. There we go. Greasy fingers. Now we're gonna go put this guy. So I like to orientate my hose clamp on the up position. And then just turn it on. You want to make sure that you've got good engagement. Take care not to rip anything, but you really want to look at the edge of your carburetor and make sure everything's parallel and it's not off. And then we'll tighten it up. So that's our air filter. Remember again to oil these guys. Do good maintenance on that. Be careful of mud puddles with this, any open air. Or if you're going to power wash it, make sure you put a good bag over it and sock it down tight. But I'm going to take this off again because I want to make sure that when I dial this stuff in, that I'm getting wide open throttle and that it's returning to its home position till we have an idle. We're going to wrap it up for tonight. We're so close we can taste it, so we're going to leave you on a cliffhanger. There's actually quite a bit of work we need to do. We want to make sure that we change the oil, get rid of the shipping oil, get that to the right level, and we want to double check our electrical. And we still got to kind of button up some of our control pieces here. And then we're also going to want to put gas in here and make sure we don't have any good leaks before we really start fire, and we still got to get the exhaust on. So I think that'll conclude. I hope you liked the video. You can find these parts and more parts on mytrailbuddy.com.